Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Terry Martin with the Illinois Channel, and I'm joined with Jeff Berkowitz of Public Affairs TV in Chicago. And Jeff, welcome to 2024 edition of you and I debating and discussing the issues. And ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining us again from around the state. Hope you had a great holiday. And we'll be talking today about the big issue, and the big issue of 2024 is the federal elections, both for president and control of Congress, both in the House and the Senate. Jeff and I are going to be focusing more on these races in the U.S. Senate that are going on. And Jeff, it is going to be a tough year as we look at it right now for the Democrats in the Senate. And if you look at the polls, it will be a tough year for Joe Biden to win re-election. Why don't you give me your initial analysis of what you see from the beginning of January?
Well, as we look at it now, the big issues in terms of the November 5 presidential election and the control of Congress, border security, the mess at the border, the southern border, the migrant issue mess, national security issues, the war in Ukraine and Russia that's been going on now for more than a year, the war between Hamas and Israel in the Middle East that seems to be involving Iran, and that's really more of the problem with that war, how we're going to deal with Iran. We haven't been, the U.S. has not been dealing with it. And inflation, of course.
Well, let me nail you down here. You're kind of throwing out a grab bag of issues. If we're looking at the presidential election, what is going to be the major issue or major two issues that are going to determine who controls the White House?
Okay. The Republicans will be running on the border and the mess dealing with migrants and on inflation, crime, and so forth domestically. And the Democrats will be running on abortion, anytime, anywhere they want to have it, no restraints, adults or minors, and the fear of Donald Trump. They've given up on Bidenomics, so now the Democrats say they're trying to remind people, whatever you think of the state of the country, remember it's a choice between Donald Trump, who you should be terribly afraid of because of insurrection, fear of democracy being lost, etc., and so it's that fear, and Joe Biden, who is still going to be stability and calmness, even though he's 81 going on 100.
All right, I'm going to remind the audience that about last May, when you and I were discussing this, I said Joe Biden will not be the nominee of the Democratic Party. He's too infirmed and he's too corrupt. And we're seeing the corruption. The Republicans in the House are still looking at impeachment. They're having impeachment hearings. I mean, it's not the hearings yet, but they're investigating. We've seen all this evidence that's come out about 20 different LLCs the Biden family has had, millions of dollars that they've taken in from foreign entities like China, like Ukraine, like Russia. So I still think that while it is late in the game, the Democrats could do a switcheroo at the Democratic National Convention. As far as the Republicans, I think this idea of anyone challenging Trump is a fantasy, unless something extraordinary were to happen. If Trump was physically infirmed for a stroke, a heart attack or something out of the blue, or something that some scandal that broke that we have just not been made aware of. We are about, as we tape this, we're on the edge of Iowa, we're on the edge of New Hampshire. I don't think these really matter. You've got a number of candidates who are running to see who can be second to Donald Trump. So just to put it in context.
Terry, that's all fine and dandy. That's all what the polls say, what you've just said, that Trump is far and away ahead of the others, mainly DeSantis and Haley in Iowa, and that Trump is far ahead, but less far ahead of Nikki Haley in New Hampshire. But nobody's cast a vote. So in 11 days, we'll have the first vote in the Iowa caucus, January 15. Then we'll know, are the polls exactly as you said, or could they have been wrong? Did Ron DeSantis secretly somehow or quietly build up a tremendous ground game because he spent all this time and money and effort on Iowa? Will it surprise? Will it surprise the poll? The polls have been wrong before. Could they be wrong again? And in New Hampshire, can Nikki Haley, who's now pulled ahead considerably of DeSantis and is, I think, within 20 points or so of Trump in New Hampshire, can she pull it off? If she can come close, she doesn't have to win. If she just shows herself to be a credible threat to, or credibly close to Trump in New Hampshire, she then becomes number two, and then we'll see if she gets big momentum going into South Carolina, her state, as former governor.
Yeah, my analysis is we know who the Republican nominee is going to be. Everything else is window dressing for the political hacks on the networks to discuss. It's obvious who the Republican nominee is going to be. It's going to be Donald Trump, and that's why he's been targeted by the Biden Department of Justice and these prosecutors, these political hack prosecutors across the country, bringing indictments. They're pulling out every stop they can to try to railroad Trump from returning to the White House. In the meantime, Joe Biden every week is falling in the polls. He's down to about 38%. No one who has ever been that low has ever won re-election. So that's where we are in the presidential race.
The 38%, for folks who don't focus on this closely, are the approvals of him, approval as president, his approval on what he's done with the economy, what he's done on foreign policy, so forth.
Yeah, we
and
know.
Certainly on the border. And certainly on the border, that is the big issue. Unless you turn on CNN and MSNBC, it's the border, the border, the border. If you turn on CNN and MSNBC, it's democracy. It's the fear of what Trump did on January 6th.
And by the way, Jeff, I'll point out that you're wearing a red sweater. I'm wearing a blue sweater, so we're just being bipartisan here as we start off our analysis. But
yeah, exactly. And of course, we're one. I think we pretty much try, whatever our personal views are, people would know those, we try to give people a balanced perspective as to what's going on in the country, in the state, in the city of Chicago.
You know, I would say, going back to your point, people can debate, as we have throughout the decades, throughout the centuries, what economic policy is best. But when you talk about the border, it's black and white. Everyone can see there are close to 300,000 people came over the border in December. That was a record. It reports I heard today, the cartels are making $3.2 million a week, $128 million a month. This is huge, and we have no clue as to who we're allowing in the border, and we see the impact. In Chicago, where you are, in New York, finally these Democratic mayors, these Democratic governors who were all for sanctuary cities when it was theoretical, are now moaning and groaning about the impact on their cities when these immigrants are being shipped in. They didn't mind when Texas and Arizona were being flooded with illegal immigrants. Now that the illegal immigrants are in New York, and the mayor there said, Biden needs to be doing something. And, you know, there is an effort we should also mention to impeach Mayorkas, the Homeland Security Secretary. But so I think you're right about the border. The border, I think, is going to be one of the primary issues.
Well, for the elections in Congress, the elections for president in November, the big thing to keep in mind, two big numbers. Roughly, and this is indisputable, in the 4 years of Biden, by the time of the election, we'll have had at least 8 million encounters, 8 million illegal immigrants essentially walking across the border, the southern border, with very little, if any, vetting. And the vetting that goes on, we don't know these people. We don't have good relationships with many of the governments in the countries they're coming from. We're talking in not just one country. We're talking 150 countries from which large numbers of these 8 million have come from. Maybe focused on 50 countries, maybe focused on 25, but it's a broad sweep, including China and Russia and Iran are enemies. So that's a big problem for potential terrorism. We'll see if anything, we hope doesn't happen, but say if something happens with terrorism between now and November 5, will the Democrats get the blame? Will Joe Biden get the blame? Because it is his policies that have resulted in 8 million illegal immigrants from a variety of countries coming in basically unvetted. And we don't know where they are because they've been spread in large part throughout the country by the Biden administration. Now they've gotten some assistance from Governor Abbott in Texas and DeSantis in Florida, sending some of these to the sanctuary cities and states, since they said people said, and the politicians said they wanted them. Here they are, and that's caused then the migrant crisis. So New York City, Chicago, Los Angeles have now complained and moaned about how terrible the situation is. All of the border states, the real border states, have been dealing with this for years. Now it's come home to the interior.
You know,
And the second thing, let me just mention, the second thing you mentioned, that's 8 million. That was about 2 million a year. But now that rate has gone up. The annual current rate is 3.5 million in December. So that's the annual rate of encounters of illegals coming across the border.
let me talk
So
about.
last thing, Terry, if we were to do that for 4 more years of Biden at 3.5 million, we'd have 14 million more illegals in this country unvetted. With the 8 million, that's 22 million. Sort of paraphrasing Ev Dirksen, a billion here, a billion there. Before you know it, you're looking at real numbers. 22 million people here in the United States unvetted. We're getting
The other
close
thing
to
is, let's point out the obvious. These people are not, generally speaking, they don't speak English. These people are not from the culture of the United States. No country can, I mean, you are going to have a divided United States. It's not going to be the United States. It's going to be a divided hodgepodge. When we were bringing people in the past, historically, we screened them. You had to have a sponsor. If you were sick, if you had tuberculosis, they sent you away. We don't know who these people are. We don't know what diseases they have. We don't know if they're terrorists or not. What we do know is that these people are saying we're seeking sanctuary for political purposes when they have crossed through, in some cases, 7 or 8 different countries where they could have gone initially. So these are the idea that these people are seeking political sanctuary is obviously wrong. They're seeking economic sanctuary, and you don't get to come into the country for that. Again, this is a major issue for Biden. He can't defend this, and now the independents, which are so critical, the independent voters, and even many Democrats are becoming very disaffected. And in that, this is critical, in that 2 of the foundational votes for the Democratic Party, the black vote and the Hispanic vote, while they are still in the majority for Democrats, we see significant slippage there of both black voters and Hispanic voters being turned off, and primarily because of this influx of the border.
Well, yeah, and just on that point, the polling showing black vote nationally for Democrats, which usually runs something like 80% to 90% for Democrats and 10% for Republicans, is now running more like 60% for blacks, from blacks, and for the Democrats, and 10% for Republicans. So it's not so much yet that Democrats for the black vote are switching over to Republicans, but they're staying home. That's the prediction. Their turnout will be lower. So instead of 80%, 90%, you're talking 60%. That itself could throw the national election. And Hispanics, there you're getting significant turnover, significant transition of Democrats who had been voting for, the significant change in terms of the percentage of Hispanics who had been voting for Democrats now turning to vote for Republicans. They're not just staying home. They're giving a positive vote to Republicans. So those are 2 major potential shifts in demographics come November, which could turn the presidential election for Republicans and could turn Senate and House seat elections for Republicans.
Okay, now we also have House seats up, we have Senate seats up. We know the Republicans, by the skin of their teeth, want control of the House. That has thrown a monkey wrench into a lot of what Biden has been trying to do. We have the Republicans, as I mentioned earlier, trying to impeach Mayorkas and possibly Biden. I don't think an impeachment of Biden is going to happen at this point with the election now 11 months away. But they could certainly expose a lot of the corruption that's gone on. The other thing that has happened, and I want to bring the control of the Senate. The Senate is up for grabs, now controlled by the Democrats. Interestingly, on paper, the Republicans have more senators than the Democrats. There are 49 Republican senators, only 48 Democrats, but 3 independents, and the 3 independents are always voting with the Republicans, and one with the yellow here in Maine and Vermont. That's Angus King, Bernie Sanders, and it should be now because she switched. Kristen Sinema in Arizona is also running as an independent. But let me point out just before, hang on a second, while I have the map up, we have the blue states. These are all, obviously, you can see far more blue states the Democrats have to defend as compared to the Republicans. And many of these states for the Republicans are solid Republicans, like Missouri, like Indiana, like Nebraska. So that's that the Democrats are having a hard road to hoe there, as they say, to hold the Senate.
Just to simplify what you've just said, in terms of how Democrats the current voting in the U.S. Senate between Democrats and Republicans, whether some of those Democrats call themselves independents or not. In fact, the margin is 51 Democrats and 49 Republicans in terms of how they vote.
In terms of their voting. Plus they have, currently, they have the vice president, right?
And so that means essentially currently Democrats have a 2-vote margin. If they can lose one vote.
Here's why that's not true. Because you're presuming Biden is reelected.
No, I'm just saying currently.
Currently, but in other words, if Trump wins, the Republicans only need to have a net gain of 1 to control the Senate.
Right. If he doesn't win, then they need 2 votes.
That's right.
To change things.
Now let's take a look at some of these.
Okay. So the main thing you've just set to remind people, what you've just shown on the map, there are 35 seats up in the U.S. Senate up for re-election. People would
hang on 1 second. Let me bring this in. Okay, and go ahead. What you're saying.
So 35 seats. We have 6-year terms for the U.S. Senate. So that means over a 6-year span, usually you have 34 seats in 2 years.
Let's not get too geeky here. Let's get. We're going to run out of time. I want to get to the seats here.
Terry, just let me finish a sentence, okay? For God's sakes, okay? Taking 5 minutes. So usually it's 34 seats up in 2 years. 2 years later, 33. For various reasons, it's 35 this time. Just that quirk to it. And the main thing is the GOP, the Republicans, are only defending 11 Senate seats. And 9 of those are solidly Republican, according to Cook. Pretty non-biased, impartial review of this. 2 for the Republicans of those 11 are likely Republican. That's Rubio in Florida, Cornyn in Texas. So pretty much people would say the Republicans don't have a fear of really losing any of 11 seats. Something can happen, something unexpected, but you go into this November election expecting those 11 seats are retained by Republicans. But on the Democratic side, they have 24 up for grabs, and one of them is almost grabbed already because that's West Virginia. Joe Manchin is not running for re-election. He is a Democrat in name.
West Virginia, anyone who follows politics knows, West Virginia is going to go from Democrat to Republican. Joe Manchin's not running. And so let me bring up this map again here. I wanted to talk about this while we so when we look at this, we got obviously Texas, that's Ted Cruz. He is not going to be I think he'll be easily reelected. I think Florida easily holds the I don't see any seat here that the Republicans are going to lose. Hawley in Missouri, easily reelected. As we
think
look
you
at
just
the
made a mistake,
Democrats, hang
Tim.
on, I want to
Just
finish
to
this
correct
thought. As we look at the Democrats, we see Montana. Here's where people need to focus. Montana, John Tester, that is a Republican state. And we have Sherwood Brown in Ohio, also increasingly a Republican state. These are two states that Donald Trump carried. Trump, as we know, is back on the ballot. That's going to be a killer for those guys. So right there, you have West Virginia, Ohio, and Montana. And I would say with Kari Lake running in Arizona, the Democrats are going to have a very tough time holding on to that Senate seat now held by Kristen Sinema.
Well, let me just correct one thing. I think you said that was a mistake. You said Cruz is running for reelection. I don't think that's the case this year. In Texas, the seat that is up is John
Oh, John
Cornyn.
Cornyn, you're right. I was, yeah.
And John Cornyn has had trouble from time to time, but he's now rated as the likely winner without knowing more about that race in Texas. So that's Cornyn, and so that's one, just a bit of cleanup on aisle five.
Yeah.
But as you go to those three states, which you've correctly said, those are three really key because Cook rates them all three that you're talking about as toss-ups. Toss-ups. Could go Republican, could go Democrat. And Montana, Tester is always on the bubble because Montana is a Republican state. Somehow Tester has been surviving as a Democrat, but always on the bubble again this year. And Ohio, you pointed out, is now more and more, used to be viewed as purple, a Republican state, certainly presidentially. But Sherrod Brown is the guy there, strong labor candidate, very much populist, very much of the people. So he will be a tough candidate to unseat. And in Arizona, you didn't mention Kirsten Sinema. You're going to have a three-way race. You're going to have a regular Democrat. You're going to have Kirsten Sinema, who now says she's a self-identified independent, and you're going to have a Republican. And you're predicting.
And
who
the
it is,
Democrat, I forget, I don't have their name in front of me, but far more to the left of the party than Kristen Sinema, which is why she became an independent. She didn't think she could get the nomination as the Democratic Party in Arizona has moved
Right.
further to the left. Kari Lake
So
is the
I'm-
Republican, obviously from her gubernatorial race and from being on television as a news anchor for some 20 years, is already well known, and we'll see what happens. Obviously, she lost the gubernatorial race.
Okay, so we've predicted a clear pickup of one in Manchin in West Virginia. We've looked at three toss-ups, and I don't make predictions at this point, but those are three of the three of the top seven that the Republicans need. Only one of those seven. They do that, they get control of the Senate if everything else stays the same. So going on from
Go
those
ahead.
three toss-ups, if we go on to the three toss-ups, the next good chance for the Republicans to pick up are four states where the Senate seat is up.
Let me bring the map back up. Go ahead.
Okay, that Cook has rated as leaning Democratic. Okay, leaning Democratic. And the first one we can maybe take a quick look at is Michigan, and Stabenow is the incumbent Democrat, but she is retiring. So you have an open seat. That is always a more friendly way to get a pickup for the opposing party when you're not running against an incumbent, but you're running against a new face, a new name coming in to run, as the Democrats will be as they run for the Senate in Michigan. So that's kind of, without knowing any more about, of course, candidate selection is key for the Republicans in this. If there is a primary, is it a Republican who can win, or is it a Republican who's catering to the base but has trouble in the general? So we'll know more as we see.
I don't know who's
candidates
running in
evolve.
Utah for the Republicans. Mitt Romney is not running again, but in most of these races for the Republicans, they have incumbents running.
Right, and Utah is not rated as a toss-up or a difficult seat.
Right.
for
I mean,
the
that's another,
Republicans.
I would say, solid Republican. Now,
Solid
you
Republican,
have
right.
you have a question also about Nevada. Jackie Rosen, the Democratic senator, not really a high-profile person. Nevada, I would say, is a purple state. It kind of can go back and forth. Democrats have been successful there of late. Do you have anything on Cook for Nevada?
I don't, other than Jackie Rosen in Nevada are rated as leans Democratic. So it's not solidly, it's leans Democratic. It's a good potential before we know more about who the Republican candidate is, et cetera. So it's certainly a good potential for Republicans. And going on from there, we take a look at Pennsylvania, another very purple state that is rated leans Democratic, not solidly, not likely, but Cook says leans Democratic, and the senator there is Casey, big name in Pennsylvania. His father preceded him, I believe, as a
His
governor
father
and
was
then as a
governor, right?
senator. Maybe he wasn't senator, he was a
And
governor. Was
Casey
it?
does not come off as a wild-eyed liberal. I mean, he seems to be more buttoned down and respectable. But I would
He
say
will
the
be,
biggest states right now for the Democrats, the biggest problem, obviously, West Virginia goes to the Republicans. So if Trump wins, and if the only state and the Republicans hold all their seats and pick up West Virginia, they would have, by virtue of the Republican vice president, whoever that is, the Republicans would take control of the Senate. But in addition, Ohio, as we said, Ohio, Michigan, Montana with Tester. Tester is, I think, very much in danger. And we'll have to see. Carrie Lake rubs some people the wrong way. We'll see if she can win election to the Senate.
excuse me.
And again, this is where we talked before. The border issue, certainly in Arizona, is huge. It could be, James Carville said it's the economy stupid. In 2024, it might be it's the border stupid.
So, so you just summarized the three key potential of 7 states that the Republicans only need one to switch control. The first three are Montana, Ohio, Arizona. Those are all toss-up states, says Cook. Then you come to the 4 other potentials. One we hadn't mentioned. We've mentioned Michigan as leans Democratic, Nevada leans Democratic, Pennsylvania leans Democratic. All are good shots for Republicans. And then Wisconsin, we hadn't mentioned, another one where the candidate there is not solid, is not likely. Tammy Baldwin is running. She's the incumbent in Wisconsin.
And I think
So
the Republicans don't have
another good potential.
We don't know who the GOP candidate in Wisconsin is yet.
But we know Wisconsin is certainly a purple state. Republicans have done very well in the legislature, in governor, in recent times. So it's a good potential pickup. So in sum, Republicans have 7 good shots here. 7 good shots.
We also know that Trump will run hard in Wisconsin because that's a state he has to win back. He did win it in 2016. He lost it in 2020. He'll want to take that back. So he's going to be moving into the state of Wisconsin among some of the other states he's targeting.
Right. All these, I think, Michigan, Nevada, even in Pennsylvania andWisconsin, all battleground states for the presidential election. I don't know about Montana.
We don't have much time. Let me ask you, if you want to, if someone put a gun to your head right now and said, Jeff, tell me who's going to be the winner of the presidential race, who's your pick as of January the 4th?
Boy, that's really tough. I think if you had to say all things considered, trials and so forth, and I would say Trump is, if it's Trump and Biden, Trump is the favorite. If it's Trump against Newsom, Trump against Pritzker, Trump against
Wrap it up.
Who else we Trump against anybody else that's going to substitute for Biden, then it's a toss-up. Okay. If it's Trump against Biden,
I would say if it's Trump against Biden, it's Trump wins, and the Republicans take the Senate. And the Republicans, I would say, also control the House. The Republicans would increase their hold on the House.
If it's Trump, Terry, against Whitmer in Michigan, Trump against Pritzker
Whitmer's
from
not going to be. If it's anyone, it's going to be Gavin Newsom, and Newsom has all kinds of problems in California. We got to get out of here. Thanks so much, ladies and gentlemen, and we will see you next time.